Hello, our truth warriors, and welcome back to the Atlantic Underground podcast. Now, when you enter the medical profession, you swear an oath to do no harm. This oath is about protecting patients, and today's guest has seen firsthand the damages caused from supposedly safe and effective products and did everything in his power to protect the people from harm. The treatment and backlash he has received from the establishment is absolutely beyond anything anybody could believe. And today we have returning with us to give us updates on his journey of honesty and truth, Dr. Dave Cartman. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Yeah, you're the only person to call me sir. Not many people consider me that, considering the press I've received. But yeah, I've aged a bit, like I say, since last time we spoke. But hey, we still motor on. Like you say, it's all about humanity
It
at the end of
is.
the day.
What doesn't break us makes us stronger, mate, and that's testament to where you are now. Now, for anyone who's not seen our previous discussions, can you give us a brief outline on what has happened to you?
Yeah, it's telling a sort of four-year story, telling a long story short, as they say. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was an observer. I was watching the same as everyone else. Some woke up straight away. Some were slower to wake up. That would be me. There's a hysteria around COVID. People, we didn't know what we were dealing with at the time. And I mean, it even led to me having the vaccine myself. It's not even a vaccine, but we know that now.
Yeah.
And so it was a kind of an awakening story for the first year or two, observations of, wacky rules, wacky testing, people, at work, it's deadly quiet. And you go back home and see the BBC, people dropping in the streets and seizing and, packed out ITUs with hazmat wearing kind of doctors, wiping the sweat off each other's brows. And it never really correlated. But for me, I mean, to cut a long story short, my stand was, and this is what got me struck off really, was that I stood for medical ethics, number one, and the ethics particularly around informed consent, making
Yeah.
sure people know what they're letting themselves in for. And if they don't want it, well, that's fair enough. As long as they've got capacity,
Yeah.
that's a human right. So that was number one, and actually give some information and don't coerce. That was the other aspect. Number two, we were giving something that's never been used on humans before, the technology base. I didn't know that when I received it myself, even. And when they started going for younger cohorts, children, teenagers, any healthy adult, really, including pregnant women, that was a real turning point in my story. And then, advocating for those two groups when no one else would. And the final thing was really vaccine injuries and seeing them for my own clinical practice. They were coming in, and it wasn't me suggesting to them that it was a vaccine, it was them. I've had this jab and then X, Y, and Z has occurred. Do you think it could be the vaccine? Of which I could say, well, we can't rule it out.
Yeah.
Whereas other doctors will staunchly say, no, absolutely nothing to do with the vaccine, even though it was yesterday. It's long COVID, for example. So I sort of tried the conventional ways. I tried to collate data. I tried to do audits. I tried to do presentations and present to my colleagues in the coffee rooms. This is what I'm reading in the early kind of literature about myocarditis, for example, in young populations. There's a warning signal here, and you'd just be told to get out of the coffee room. Don't want to hear your conspiracy theories. This is our break time. Physically pushing me at one point, one of the physios, and just screaming from the rooftops within house to start with, speak to the practice manager, speak to the partners, and fell on deaf ears. And ultimately, it came down to the decision to vaccinate the 12 to 17-year-olds, and that's when it all hit the fan. My own surgery said we're not going to vaccinate our own children. There's no rationale for this. There's no real reason to do it. And the very next day after saying that behind closed doors, they actually advertised on the website, take your 12 to 17-year-olds down the vaccine centre, what I call the Jaboteur down the road. And they sent the staff from that surgery down. That was it for me. That
Yeah.
was an ethical breach that was beyond, if it's not good for your kids, it's not good for your patients. I've seen many nurses since that have had harm from the vaccine that are still pressing the syringe in children and other adults for the thing that they don't wish to have themselves because it's imparted a swollen, inflamed heart on themselves. And these sort of things kept going on, these ethical breaches. And ultimately, it led to me just really taking to social media, doing lots of podcasts like with yourself and others, and trying to get my story out, get my observations out, because everywhere you looked, it was censorship.
Yeah.
I've done an interview. The worst interview for being banned was when I actually held up documents from Pfizer and Moderna, read them out, holding them up to the camera and reading them, running my finger along the page, and then referenced it in the comment section. And I posted it. It was essentially the incidental pregnancies from the Pfizer trial. And it was damning, the pregnant women that were admitted onto the trial in error, really, significant events happening. A quarter of the pregnant women had a severe adverse event, and a lot of them lost their babies in the ones they bothered to ask. And that was one of the things. And then it actually categorically says these are gene therapies, immunomodulatory gene therapies that will never be used in humans. This was 6 months before they used them in humans. And I'm sat there scratching my head saying, have I just woken up in the twilight zone here? This is bad practice. All of this stuff is coming out now, the data. I mean, even a basic level research would show you early days that the people who were having these jabs weren't doing well. They were in hospital. They were dying of COVID, allegedly, according to the ONS data, 80% plus at one point. And then they stopped putting that data out because it was getting worse by the month, the ONS data and the UK HSA data. And I'm sat there saying, these jabs are bad news in my own personal anecdotal experience and also the national data and international data. And yeah, so I started to see some big, high profile people saying things that weren't true on TV. And I did something called the Rogues Gallery. I just called out a few doctors and said, look, you can't say it's safe in pregnancy, 100% safe. My cup of tea here is not 100% safe. I could drop it on my toe or choke on it or, drop it somewhere I shouldn't. So go on TV and say a cup of tea is 100% safe is misleading. So to say an experimental jab is just bizarre. And so this was one of my victims. I called this woman out. Without going into too much detail, saying, you're lying. I want to know where your data is to say professionally that it's safe in pregnancy. And then it got spanned completely. And this was what happened in all incidences, that my calling out of misinformation, ironically, having been accused of that myself so often, even though I was quoting facts and data, was twisted into this narrative of Dave Cartland's a bully. We're just doctors following the NHS guidance. We're just following orders. We've heard that before. And this bullying doctor's calling us out publicly to all of his followers. And the troubling thing from the GMC was that they were saying that if I post anything about any doctor or third party and say, you come along, Chris, and throw your hat in the ring and make a comment negatively about them, I am wholly responsible for your comment because I've incited it. So you can be in trouble for your social media posts. You can be in trouble for your thinking, thought crimes. You can also be fully responsible for 308,000 followers on X alone. That was the GMC's view. And so that happened. 3 doctors turned it around and said, we've been bullied by the evil Dr. Cartland. And they ran that narrative quite successfully, quite sneakily. And then the final thing was I dared to write 5 letters of support for people who needed to travel and see dying relatives abroad on the whole. They managed to entrap me by sending an actor in to get me to offer them a vaccine exemption, or what they were asking for was an exemption, where I only offered a letter of support on the basis of bodily autonomy and primum non nocere, do no harm. You mentioned the Hippocratic Oath earlier. And they called it falsification of medical notes for money, and they never had a letter to show the tribunal. They never had so much as we asked them, what's the law? What's the international regulation that he's flouted that you say? But they couldn't quote the law. They just said, he's willing to breach guidance and this is dishonest behaviour. And that was it pretty much. I called out a practice manager. That was the 5th case against me for not employing me or interviewing me because she Googled me and found me to be, quote, a rabid anti-vaxxer. And so I called the practice out by posting the email. It was fully redacted. She tried to complain 4 times about me. Each time it was thrown out, and the final time, surprise, surprise, she's met by a guy in the car park who drops off an envelope to her that's got a completely doctored, photoshopped tweet from years ago that said basically that I'd released her name, date of birth, address, email address. It didn't happen, simple as that. And I explained that to the GMC in a 25-page statement. Guess what? They didn't receive that statement, allegedly. I got 2 read receipts to say they did. So they're losing evidence, they're hiding evidence, they're ignoring evidence, and they actually banned all my witnesses from speaking. They stopped me from having. I did a really comprehensive bundle using comparative cases to try and show, it's equity in me being in front of a panel for 3 tweets about a doctor when this doctor's tweeted about me 150 times, including death threats. You've let him off. Yeah. We need to bring that in as a kind of proportionality. They wouldn't allow it. The GMC decided not to investigate that doctor. Firstly, it didn't reach their threshold. Secondly, I wasn't even allowed to use it in my own defence. So all this was going on, lots of other shenanigans. And at the end of it, the head of the CPS London they'd brought in for this. And then they brought in a homicide terrorist barrister for the GMC's counsel against a little old ex-Brummie Cornish GP, and they brought the big dogs in.
Yeah.
And they had absolutely no. They just took stripped context out of everything. Like Dave Cartland said X, but they didn't want to know why Dave Cartland said X.
Yeah.
What was the reason? One of my victims tweeted about me multitudes of times, and I retaliated unwisely, aggressively at times under the abuse, and they've just framed that poking the bear. The bear reacts. And they're
Yeah.
just taking a snapshot of the bear reacting, not why the bear reacted. And
Yeah.
they eliminated all context to every case. And the headlines were Cartland struck off.
Yeah.
They didn't go to suspend me. They struck me off on the pretense that I was, quote, a danger to the public. I brought the profession into disrepute. And the best of all was I negatively affected public confidence in the profession. So that was it. I was gone. The media ran with it. If you Google me now, you'll see it's not a pretty sight. The tabloids ran, the BBC ran with it, and it's just been a complete misrepresentation because at the end of it all, I'm a family man, I'm a Christian man, I hate bullies. I was bullied at school. I absolutely despise bullies. I think they're the lowest of the low, and to be called one is really, really upsetting.
Yeah. But
That's
at
what
the end of the day, if this case you had won, it would set precedent, and that would open the floodgates for everybody else who it would literally undermine the whole thing that had gone on.
Well, over
And
the 4 years, I've watched every colleague that spoke out, the brave few, and you can count them on two hands, really.
yeah,
And I've watched them be picked off by the GMC system. Now, the GMC is supposed to be a regulator, a charity regulator. I pay £50 or paid £50 a month. I had no say in what that went on. But then you look at their investment portfolio. They're investing in Big Pharma, AstraZeneca, and Merck. Not only that, they go for Nestle and PepsiCo. This is a regulator for medicine investing without our permission into these things. The GMC have had a vote of no confidence from the BMA for 2 years. Go to their Trustpilot site, 1-star rating, loads of abusive feedback. They're not fit for purpose.
no,
And yet they're allowed to proceed to send people to the kangaroo court, which was the
yeah,
MPTS, to be fitted up. That's what it was. It was, we know that people get put in prison for murder that they haven't committed. It
yeah,
happens.
oh yeah,
There are bent judges, there are bent lawyers and solicitors, but I've never seen anything like it. My barrister was exasperated. He needed to take weeks and weeks off work after it. He's never come across anything. And at the end of the day, I've been found guilty of harassment. And there's two things. If I harass you tonight, Chris, you've got two options. You can go call the police, or you can go to court and sue me for harassment under the PHA 1997. None of those things were done. They used the free swing. They used the GMC because it doesn't cost them. It costs the members
wow,
to run this court at no one's expense, as in none of the victims' expense. So, there was open collaboration between all of the complainants. That was easy to see. They just wouldn't look. I've never heard of a defendant not being able to bring one witness to his own defence. And some of them were highly relevant. They just said these witness statements are irrelevant and inadmissible.
yeah,
But like you say, if they let me through, they'd have had to then look at some of the other cases. Like people have been struck off just for questioning the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. Colleague Daniel Armstrong.
yeah. Have you ever seen the case of the Chicago 7? There's actually a thing on Netflix at the moment, and the case of Chicago 7. It was quite obvious that the government and the judge and some nefarious means, again, they wouldn't allow witnesses, they wouldn't allow legal representation for people. It was a kangaroo court. If anyone's not seen it, go and watch it. It's about protesting of all things, which is a very prominent thing in the UK at the moment. And maybe it's a perfectly timed thing for people to watch this on Netflix and realize how the system does work and what danger people are in. But there we go. Anyway, like any normal and just rulings, is the grounds for appeal for you against the GMC?
Well, as you can imagine, the gavel goes down. I'm struck off after, I think it took about 5 weeks in the end, and it led to a couple of mental breakdowns, if I'm honest with you. It really
Yeah,
did. The impact of all this over 3 years for doing the right thing, it's quite surreal. So when the strike off happened, I took to my bed for about 3 weeks, as you can well imagine, barely shaved, barely showered, licking my wounds, just
yeah,
destroyed everything. Bearing in mind, my whole life's geared towards this vocation, from playing doctor in the nursery to GCSEs, A levels, and every decision is made to get into medical school. And I took the
yeah,
long-winded route. So I had 3 weeks in bed, and essentially it costs about. I was being quoted 15 to 20 grand. Now it cost 80 grand for my GMC barrister defence, 80,000. So that's just gone. And, and I've been erased. We lost.
Yeah.
So you've got a choice to spend 15 grand. That's only my side. If I take an appeal and lose, I face the GMC costs. Now, these two barristers are on 6K a day, I'm
Wow.
told.
Oh.
Yeah. So if I take them to appeal just to speak to a brick wall for a few more days and rack up the costs, I mean, every day we were doing 2 days work, 2 hours work in the tribunal, and they'd just adjourn. And I've just paid a barrister full day's pay. Doesn't matter to him. He's got his full day's rate. They've adjourned after a bit of to-in and throw-in. But yeah, to answer your question, at that I had a week. I had no time to raise the funds. I let the appeal go, partly due to that and partly due to the fact I'm just going to be speaking to the same people within the same corrupt system. So the plan was always a judicial review to get it in front of a court judge at the High Court. And I know other doctors who've been successful, and there's a high success rate generally on overturning these kangaroo courts, particularly when so many injustices. I mean, I've not even touched on any of the injustices and factual misrepresentations and frank lies, really, that were told.
Yeah.
Just one side of a story, without doubt. And so, yeah, you get 3 months from the strike-off date, and then you start asking how much it's going to cost. So this is like on another level. So then you got to be finding 20 to 30 grand plus VAT. And that's just your side. Again, if you lose, you pay their costs. And this is at the High Court, the King's Bench. Yeah. So, you've just been struck off. You just lost your 100 grand a year career. You haven't got a job and you're unlikely to get a job because of all the press. And they're asking you for 20, 30 grand up front to do a judicial review. It's just impossible. So I did a crowdfund, and unfortunately another legal situation, which I can't talk about, stepped in conveniently at the time to take that money away. And I was unable to financially. I'll tell you now, if I could go back to the judicial review, now the time's gone. The time's gone. You have to do it within 3 months, and that was 2 months ago, unfortunately. But we'd easily win. But unfortunately, money's money, isn't it?
Yeah, I know exactly what it is. I know a doctor in Canada, and he was speaking out against everything. We actually interviewed him very early on when we first started doing the podcasts. He actually went to law school now, and he's now become a lawyer because he is now fighting against the system that was trying to stop him saying and doing what he was doing. So, hats off to him. He switched his profession, and now he's fighting back for those who have been injured, which is a fantastic thing. Now, it's been over
about my case if he fancies doing a pro bono job.
I don't know how his Canadian credentials would work in the UK, but you never know. And if any lawyers are watching this now, that think injustice has been done, get in touch with us. There's always open for discussion what can and can't be done.
The only way I can think is to take an action against the GMC and MPTS now, sue them.
Yeah.
Sue them for what they've done. It's been defamation, it's been reputational damage. I mean, right at the beginning, they wrote a letter to all my employers saying, without any evidence being heard, it's just accusations from trolls at the time.
Yeah.
Saying, just to let you know, your locum doctor's been accused of harassment, bullying, and deception. Now, you're not going to have him back. And that was about 2 years before the tribunal started. So you can imagine locally in Cornwall, the damage that did. Mud sticks around here. I never worked again pretty much for the 2 years up to the tribunal itself. So even at that level, a human right to earn a living, it's protected. A human right to a fair trial, free speech. And we tried again to strike this off with the GMC under an EHCR breach. Strike off the case. You're not allowing Dr. Conley's witnesses. That's not a fair trial. And they went away, deliberated, came back and said, no, we're carrying on. Yeah. And many other cases like that.
That's it. I mean, it's been over 5 years now since this all exploded into everyone's lives. And today, despite many other bizarre distractions going on in the world, it is still a core topic of conversation for many. And over the 5 years, there's been so much evidence proving the dangers of safe and effective that it should never be questioned that there are dangers there with this. Why would the GMC not even consider the evidence? Are they living a lie, or are they heavily influenced by the multi-billion-dollar industry that has profited from this?
Well, you've answered it, I think. You've answered it with that second point. When the regulator's actually actively investing, its portfolio is in big pharma, and then you've got the strings being pulled from above. We saw the face, actually. One of the spectators on my side looked at the faces of these characters as they struck me off. And they said they had somber expressions. Their whole demeanor changed. like almost they knew what they were doing. They were striking a good man off, a dedicated doctor. You could feel it in the room. Apparently, I wasn't
Yeah,
there. I didn't go to the second bit. But yeah, to answer your question, it's all you follow the money, don't you? You follow the
yeah,
money. We're in a world where a patient cured is a customer lost. Simple as that.
yeah,
And these jabs have created a lot of future customers. The GMC know what's going on. Look, I know what I've sent to the GMC documentation wise, data wise. I kept them well informed. I know plethora of other doctors that chose the approach of writing letters and sending data and publications in, fell on deaf ears.
yeah,
They know. It's not that they can say in the future we were not informed of this, and you don't even need to have it sent to you. It's very simple. It's even made it to the mainstream media the last few weeks. We're seeing some pretty damning stuff about the excess death data.
yeah,
We don't want to let the vaccine status out of these people because it might cause a bit of stress for people in the community to know that it's actually the highly vaccinated that are dropping,
yeah,
which is what they're saying essentially, reading between the lines. So yeah, of course I know, and they're bought and paid for, and there's layers, aren't there? There's layers of who controls who. The
yeah,
doctors are the puppets. The managers above the doctors. They've received their funding from big
yes.
pharma, all roads lead to these rich billionaires at the top. Who are ruthless. They
Oh, yeah,
want the
absolutely.
disease.
Yeah,
What has big pharma actually cured? We've got how many billions go into cancer research? We still got cancer. In fact, we got the highest cancer rate than ever. So
yeah,
what are they spending all these billions on?
yeah. No, we know that. We know that the billions are there to just continually kick the can down the road, and that it's very unfortunate. Now, I mean, you've worked with homeless people on outreaches and services, but the complaints to the GMC, they were from just other doctors. You never had a complaint from a patient, ever.
That's the
So,
point. You've got it there. So there was no clinical negligence. There was no patient complaint. In fact, there were hundreds and hundreds of testimonies of ex-patients and colleagues, 350 all told. The GMC said, we're not going to take regard of these testimonies because, quote, they do not understand the intricacies of this case. But it doesn't matter whether they know the case or not. It's a testimony. It's a standalone behavioural, bit of testimony to say Dave Cartland's a nice guy, as you mentioned. I've worked with the homeless. There's nothing I haven't done in my. I teach students. I've learnt surgery, minor ops, and so much wasted talent just for a political
yeah.
erasure, really. And I don't know why this has happened. Well, I do know.
Well, we
Of
do
course,
know, yeah. It's the cost. It's the cost to the establishment. Um, should a ruling go in favor of those pointing out the harm that
I,
could be
I
done?
did an SAR, Chris, to the GMC, and I think it was 254 complaints. So bearing in mind, 200, what was it, my maths, 249 of them had been closed down. And I actually asked for some of the complaint. Well, I asked for the whole lot. They stopped after giving me about a quarter. And basically, they were either anonymous. So you don't even have to. You can be Joe Blogs and say I'm concerned about. And the bulk of the complaints were doctors and nurses, the ones that did identify themselves. So again, snitches from within, rather than have an adult conversation. Or I'd have appreciated a knock on the door or a letter from my local responsible officer just to give me a bit of a friendly warning, saying, look, shut up.
Yeah,
And none of that happened. GMC didn't offer me any remedial action, as it were. And essentially, the complaints were very wishy-washy. I've seen them all, every single complaint physically, and they're Dr. Cartland spreads misinformation. Dr. Cartland spreads misinformation. Dr. Cartland spreads misinformation, and there's no evidence, no citation, there are no specifics, and secondly, there's no rebuttal. So they're
yeah,
saying he's spreading misinformation, didn't post what exactly was misinformation and why it was misinformation, just bleating like a little school snitch.
yeah,
And that's what it was in the end. I couldn't believe when I'm reading it. And obviously they were thrown out, which is the right thing to do, except these 5 cases of the practice manager, the 3 doctors that felt offended, and the 5 letters of support for people to honour their own bodily autonomy and right to refuse. I mean, we've got other doctors, Chris, that are being let off for rape, sex crimes,
yeah,
drugs, crimes, clinical negligence. Recently we've had some really horror headlines about doctors that are being arrested and they're still not struck off. Pornographic images, they're suspended perpetually, but not struck off. So, I've had the sanction of Harold Shipman. We share the same sanction, strike off. He
yeah.
killed people. I wrote some letters.
No, it's insane. But at the end of the day, it's changed so much. I mean, what you're saying there, what you've spoke out about being offended, these doctors being offended, this has now become a daily occurrence within the United Kingdom, where if you say something online and someone's offended, the police are at your door. It's gone too far. I mean, at the end of the day, before, even when we were children, even before the invention of the internet, things were said, people said things about people, and yeah, people got offended, but they just sucked it up or dealt with it. You know, the ability now to call the police up and say somebody said something about me online and I'm offended by it, and next minute the police are there as if you've committed a heinous crime, is getting to a point of absolutely ridiculousness, and nothing
Again,
is.
they're very selective, Chris, about who they do that to. So, if you write something of a specific subject, and I won't mention them for triggering anyone, but yeah, I mean, I've gone into the police myself and reported 20 characters that were incessantly bullying, abusing, harassing me. They've already canned 15 of them
Yeah,
because I've gone online and said, leave me alone. They've classed it as interacting with stalkers. So we're not going to act on that, even though they followed me around the country, took pictures of me, followed me and my family to beaches, apparently followed me on school runs. They found out where I was working miles and miles away from home and called the practice on the last day I ever worked, telling them that I was this troublemaking bully. So these people, so the point I'm making is that if you write something about, well, I won't say, I don't want to get myself in trouble, something that somebody deems socially unacceptable at this time, you'd
yeah,
be arrested, even though I could set up an account tonight as Joe Blogs and write something Islamophobic, for example, for want of a better example. I'd be arrested by the night out. Now, I've got these characters who have been absolutely abusive to me. I won't name names, but they've been under investigation, but they've been going for 6 or 8 months now. They're contacting Twitter to identify them.
yeah,
Now, that was 3 or 4 months ago, and they're continuing worse than ever now. I mean, they're posting pictures of me as Adolf Hitler, Ian Brady, other mass murderers, and they're putting my face on it. If I did that to any other person, they'd be arrested. Or
yeah,
I'd be arrested, should I say. But there's this whole thing again. You go into the police, you feel like they're not listening to you. And again, it must be because, there must be some instruction higher up that if this Dave Cartland comes in and accuses these people, well, they are the 77th, so there's a
yeah,
ring of protection around them, or whoever they are, whichever CCDH, whoever this NGO is that runs this operation, because it is coordinated. There's no doubt
yeah.
about that. The
Oh,
time spent, the
yeah,
targeting, there's nothing they haven't tried with me, whether it's my refereeing, hobby, minimum wage. They contacted the FA almost weekly, so they tell me. Children's services, neighbours, ex-wives, partners, friends, family, neighbours around here and back at home, for hit pieces. There's nothing that they haven't done. So it didn't just stop at the GMC. I thought that would be, pound of flesh, take
yeah,
your victory, and they did, but they carried on.
no,
I don't know who they are, but
yeah.
and then you get told, this sounds a bit paranoid, Dr. Cartland. When you go to the police, this sounds a bit delusional. They start throwing this in and start trying to pin you with mental health slurs. It's like, no, actually got the evidence. I've got all the screenshots of these
Yeah, yeah,
people.
that's it.
I've had to keep
Exactly the
robust
same
evidence.
evidence that was used against you by other people, but probably a lot more aggressive and a lot more threatening and a lot more derogatory.
It's
And
it's a great example. So one of the victims is a guy who's kind of known as the top troll on Twitter. I won't name names because they're vulnerable witnesses apparently, but he goes around bullying people online, and I've sent them a portfolio of 600 tweets about me. 600 tweets about other doctors going around just calling them grifters, liars, shills, questioning their credentials, just bullying behavior. And then this individual went for the vaccine injured groups, calling them malingerers, get a job, liar, liar, your bum's on fire, when they're posting their husband's death certificates. So that was all in the GMC's hands, saying, look, this is the perpetrator. Yes,
yeah,
I've retaliated to him a few times. I'll give you one example, if I may. I called it, he's a sheep farmer. I said, leave me alone, you sheep shagger. I said that. I'll put my hands up to it in retaliation. The GMC turned that. This is exactly demonstrates what they did. Dr. Cartland accused a fellow professional of having a sexual interest in animals and bestiality. I was found guilty of that from one tweet. Leave me alone, you sheep shagger.
yeah.
That's all I said. I mean, that's what they did. This is the twist on every single tweet they ever captured. Unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, this guy, I mean, all this evidence, was I allowed to use these 600, and I think it's about 60 vaccine injury tweets? No, you called him a sheep shagger. This guy isn't up to, go to his regulators and complain about him if you so wish. Again, protected. this guy is, I don't know how he's not in prison for what
Well,
he's
he
done.
will be. He will be at some point, or some. The thing is, karma will take him out, and that's the fortunate thing of this. Eventually, those who have done what they've done, they can't live with themselves, and they'll just eat themselves alive. Now, you've written three books now. One is called "Do No Harm: The Diaries of a Vaccinated Anti-Vaxxer," and another one called "A Doctor's Despair," which also has a second edition. Without it becoming a spoiler for those that will probably want to read these books, please give us an outline on what they're about and let us know, what inspired you to push forward and do this. Because writing a book's quite a big thing, especially when it's from such a personal level.
Yeah, so this is, I'm going to use some props if that's all right. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
know
all
how the
good.
camera works. So this is the first one. This is A Doctor's Despair. So it's a second edition. So it's the original book, but we've added some new poetry into it, and most of it's from myself. And those poems came from a mixture of things, really. The original idea for the book came from a period of insomnia, so I wasn't sleeping. So I don't know why. I sat up one night and wrote a poem called Doctor's Despair, and it's there in the book to read. And it went on from there. I started to think about some of the other indiscretions of the era. I was thinking about the masks and the lockdown, so I wrote a poem about masks and a poem about lockdowns. The lockdown one wasn't that good, so I scrapped that. But it's called Maskaholics. And so I decided at the time that I would reach out to some of my fellow reprobates and ask, people to contribute. So we had Claire Craig, Matt Letitia et al., lots of other
Yeah,
doctors contributing to it. We made an anthology, and it was really successful. And then the GMC thing happened, and so I put more of my thoughts into poetry, and I wrote a couple more. One was called Blind Obedience, quite a good one actually. I've been doing some readings online, so if anyone wants to listen to these, find me on Twitter. But there's one called Pharmakeia, of the obvious reason about the corruption in pharmacy. I'm trying to think of the one, COVID cultists. That's another one. So they're kind of like
yeah,
cutting poetry, and it was kind of, the reason was therapy, I guess, and catharsism, just to kind of put my thoughts about the injustices. It's a bit like Bob Moran did art, Abby
yeah,
Roberts did comedy, my choice was poetry.
yeah,
I don't know why, that has just kind of happened one day. So that's that book, and it's, like I say, I'm really excited for that to be on people's Christmas list, because it's different. No one does poetry anymore. But some of the poetry is really deep, really harrowing, and quite dark. And there's some
yeah.
funny ones as well. So there's a mixture. So that's that. And then this one is Do No Harm. As you can see, quite a, I don't know if you can see, it's the diaries of a vaccinated anti-vaxxer. So that's an interesting concept, isn't it? That you can be
Yeah.
an anti-vaxxer having received the quote unquote vaccine. Do no harm, just to remind my colleagues of the Hippocratic Oath they don't follow. And I
Yes.
call it the hypocritical oath. This nice mRNA jab poison with the British medical. Well, it's a medical symbol anyway. Just to remind the medical profession what they were doing. And at the top you can see there's a little mRNA. You can't see it on camera, but just a reminder that I'm talking specifically about mRNA, albeit all the other vaccines are terrible. And obviously a little nod to the struck off doctor. So yeah, and that's my story really. So again, I was approached by kind of when I was thinking about doing it anyway, Fisher King publisher, Rick Armstrong, who's a really good guy, said, he's written, he's supported a lot of the authors who have written the controversial stuff during the COVID era. And he said, get it down. So I think I took 2.5 days, maybe 3 days, day and night, sat in front of this very computer, scotch in my hand, and started to write my thoughts, and it just flowed. And I just wanted to tell my side of the story, because it had been so badly stripped from the
Yeah.
story. You Google me now and you see about this bullying, harassing, dishonest, homophobic apparently as well. I'm not homophobic in any shape or form,
No.
but that didn't stop them writing it in the press. I wouldn't have believed honestly that this was possible. I've been Wakefielded in 2025, but anyway, so their story takes you through from, the first chapter actually is why, let me just get the exact name of the, why did I become a doctor? So it is what it says on the tin. I'll tell the story of my life pre-med school. Why did
Yeah.
I? What decisions I made, what skills I had, what were my aspirations, what were my motivations. And it's all around patient care, holistic care, and my wish was always to be a GP, to follow a patient from cradle to grave, as it were, the old school GP. And then it goes through the med school interview and my early career, talking about kind of some of the characters in play in medicine, and some of the institutional bullying that goes on, some of the superiority complexes, ego and narcissism of senior members of staff,
Yeah.
God complexes almost, some of the behavior. So I'll go through a few anecdotes of that. And then I come to the COVID era, both in the Midlands and when I came over here, just talking about some of the indiscretions, the quietness of the hospitals, the how the testing didn't make sense to me from what I knew about PCR. And then I went. So I actually include in the book a letter that it's called the NHS PAG, Performance Advisory Group, asked me to write evidence. How did you come to the position that you're in? And I've enclosed the letter in the book, and it goes through certain points of how I converted from kind of semi-believing in it to not. And I never received a reply after I sent that to the NHS PAG, surprisingly.
Probably very inconvenient for them.
Inconvenient, yeah. And then I went on to the Kangaroo Court, the MPTS Tribunal, and tell the story in a couple of swift chapters and give some of the details of some of the just absolute joke it was.
Yeah,
absolute joke. I can't really say much more than that. It was every decision went against me. Everything was stripped away other than negatives, and a narrative was spun. And here I am, erased. And then at the very end, I talk about and remind doctors about why did you become a doctor, and very much remind them of their own GMC guidance that they're going against, their good medical practice, their duty of candor. I keep harping on about this. GMC guidance on the duty of candor is if you mess up. It's sweet irony. I was struck off for negatively affecting public confidence in the profession. But, these guys who are now keeping their head down and hoping it goes away and suffering a bout of recurrent ostrich syndrome, the people who come to me, Chris, every day, they will never see a doctor again. They will never see a doctor again, either because they've just witnessed what everyone else has who's, quote, awake, and won't ever go near it. But to watch these doctors get away with it, they're watching their relatives getting sicker and sicker. They're going to funerals every other week. Somebody's responsible for this. Somebody best take some responsibility. And I was always taught in med school, even if you're wrong, not admit error, apologize. In certain terms, say if you're innocent, just say, I'm sorry you felt this way. And the reason you do that is called the duty of candor. It's all about maintaining confidence between the sacred doctor-patient relationship.
Yeah.
Which is gone now, unfortunately. And I don't think the doctors who are still going up and picking the last dregs of their salary up realise that they're being replaced and they're not trusted. The reason their days are now quiet, people won't go and see them. And it's an ever-increasing number. It's an ever-increasing chunk of society. People are realising now. I'm seeing it in my follower accounts on socials. It's flying at the moment because people know. So many DMs every day of people who originally went for it and fell for it. That's the most common message I get. 90% every day are from people who've just awoken or have awoken over the last year. And these people aren't best pleased, just to warn the medical profession. They are not best pleased.
No, that's it. Now, where can people find these books? Because I think that, as you said, this would be a Christmas present I would want to receive. And if people like the doctors, maybe it's a gift they could buy and give to their doctors as well. It would be
it would be an absolute shame if every person who's queuing up for their COVID booster this summer, this winter, ends up with one of these in their Christmas stocking. What I would say about it, I've written it in a certain way, so it's gentle, it's non-conspiratorial, it's not, it's statements of fact. I've tried to be academic about the discussion and tried to give a personal touch that I'm just this normal bloke.
Yeah.
That became a doctor, highly motivated to help people, and then that was taken away. And I hope people feel that injustice. The feedback so far has been, we can't put this book down. We can feel your anguish in every page. And, it's a shame if it ended up on every single doctor's surgery, if anyone rich wants to buy a massive chunk of them and post them out to every surgery, I'm happy to help collate that as well. It'd be wonderful because I know these doctors know what's going on. I've worked with them. I know, they blank me because they can't bear to even respond to, because I've been trying to warn for the 5 years. These doctors, I see them read the message, they just ignore. Yeah. And I sent them every single doctor in my phone book, the excess death, UK HSA rule not to release the data. Every single doctor read it. Not one doctor responded. I wouldn't want to be those doctors.
No.
Yeah, I want this to be like I said, everyone to people to give to the neighbours, the friends, the family. We know that this is split families.
Yeah,
it's split friend circles, it's split colleagues, relations. So, give it to, if somebody's called you a COVID, an anti-vax or a tin hat wearer, send them one. Send them one of
Have you
these
ever
with
sent
my
it to
love.
ever sent it to everyone that had called me that day? But it cost me an absolute fortune.
That's what I'm getting at. I'll do one. No, I mean, again, that's the other thing I'd say. I mean, it's a quick read. You can read it in 3 hours, maybe. It's quite
Yeah,
thin, and we set the price. I mean, most people selling books at 12, 15, 20 quid nowadays. We set it at 9 quid, and it barely covers costs. So it's not the fact we're going to get rich out of this. I think we make about 2 quid a book.
yeah. It's about
So
getting the information out there.
getting it out, and if imagine the feathers it would ruffle.
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
it's already ended up number one on 3 domains on Amazon. And bearing in mind, it's a worldwide league
yeah.
table. I'm top three, top in three of them. So
Excellent. Now you live in a small town down in Cornwall, and I imagine it's as always in those areas. Most people know each other's business, and some are going to be your patients that you've treated over time, and people that you know. How are they responding to you on a daily basis? Are you're out and about, you're seeing people, you've still got to interact on a daily basis. Um, are they believing the hype, or are they actually supportive of what you've done?
I live in a little village, a little farming village. So let's just say they treat me like I've got a bad case of BO or leprosy. No one talks to me essentially. I've got a couple of friends in the village. I mean, I gave one my book openly in the playground the other day. First thing he did, shoved it down his top. He didn't want to be seen holding this disgraced doctors, and he's a friend. So with friends
Yeah,
like that, who needs enemies? So yeah, I mean, it is Cornwall. It's very different, I guess, to other places in mud sticks. It's almost like that village mentality across the peninsula, really. And I do get some support in the refereeing circles. People coming up to me saying, and parents from my son's football saying that we're reading all this stuff about you. It's just not you. That's not your character. We've known you for 5 years. That's not you. You're not a
yeah.
bully. What are they? What's the story, Dave? And all the referees know me, and all the players that I referee know that I'm a good ref, and
Yeah.
a nice chap, and they can't collate the two stories. But in terms of
No, no,
waking up to
exactly.
COVID, I can have an academic conversation with the football lads and the refs and the grocery delivery guy. They all know what's going on. The gardeners, the mechanics, all the normal people. But as soon as you get to anyone who's in any level of healthcare or academia, then the ostrich syndrome strikes.
I
And
wonder
it's not
why.
ostrich syndrome, it's called willful blindness,
Yeah,
cognitive dissonance,
yeah,
paycheck received, buyer's remorse.
yeah,
These are some of the things. Now, imagine waking up knowing that you've been jabbing children, and then you suddenly hear Dave Cartland talking about oncogene promoters being found as, quote, contaminants in some of the vials, and these are oncogenes that switch
yeah.
on cancer. It's just, you don't want to be hearing it. I wouldn't want to be hearing it, particularly if
No,
I've been
no.
giving it to pregnant women. Imagine being an obstetrician giving this to pregnant women. The miscarriage rate's flying.
Yeah.
You see
And
that in
it's like,
the reproductive vials in America. Yes, it's not an ideal system, but as soon as they started jabbing women, all these menstrual disorders shut off the radar, off the scale. All the miscarriages, all the fetal deaths. All the local midwives around where I live, they're all starting to speak out now.
yeah,
And because of what happened, placentas were being delivered that were just disheveled, for want of a better phrase,
yeah.
and these women were all vaccinated. My very last day at work, I saw a patient who had gastric cancer, 31, had 3 jabs. You don't see 31-year-olds with gastric cancer. And on
No,
the same day, a bilateral breast cancer metastasized. She had 3 jabs.
yeah,
I wasn't seeing these early aggressive cancers in unusual cohorts in any other cohort but the vaccinated.
yeah.
And I've seen the same with infertility, menstrual problems, autoimmune conditions. The story's complete as far as I'm concerned. And I'm seeing the same patients that these other GPs are seeing. I
Yeah.
can see it in their eyes now. They know.
Oh, yeah. But could
They
you
know.
imagine? Could you imagine if the truth came out that it was linked to these safe and effectives? And at the end of the day, the mass amount of people. I mean, the thing is, I know they gave the moment they give full immunity to these pharmaceutical companies and everybody that's behind it, you have to ask why. Because at that time, when they gave the immunity, this hadn't exploded to the levels that it is today. But if it was proven and people, were able to get the evidence into the courts and say, yeah, this, the anomaly itself, the numbers speak for themselves. There's no denying it. But I know that no judge in the circuit at all would touch this, because his career would be over. Because
Yeah.
again, this is such a spider's web of conspiracy. It's absolutely unbelievable. And they
And
call
let
us,
the,
they call us conspiracy theorists. That's fine. That's because there is a conspiracy, and it's a conspiracy to do harm. And
mm.
people just choose to ignore it because it's inconvenient for their lifestyles now.
But again, I think what the doctors and nurses forget is obviously they're using the defense of we're just following orders. Now, that didn't go too well in Nuremberg
No.
for starters, but so they'll pass it up the chain. So you've got all these volunteers and very junior staff. They were pressing the syringes. They weren't
Yeah.
aspirating them either, but that's another story. So they were giving the jabs. And then obviously they're doing that because the doctors told them to. And the
Yeah.
doctors are doing it because the local health managers have told them to. And the local managers have done it because the national managers and the government have told them. And you go all the way up the chain to the pharmaceutical industry who said, we've got indemnity, mate.
Yeah.
Go look elsewhere for your recompense. So they go back down the chain and say, no, it's not us. We didn't give it. Down,
Yeah.
down, 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 down. Guess what? The injector. The book stops if the administrator of the injection. Fact. End of. And there should be some twitchy bums out there, to be honest with you,
I would
because
imagine.
it's a bit like if I came up to you and pressed a syringe full of liquid and you dropped down dead the next day, I'd be done for murder or
Yeah.
suspected murder. They'd want to know what was in that syringe, Chris.
Yeah.
But it
And
doesn't
that's it
seem
with
to
your
apply
nurse.
universally to the COVID vaccine, inverted commas, bioweapon.
Yeah, if let's say you're a nurse or a doctor that has given an injection and it's caused injury, it's caused death, or it's proven that this is you know it's undeniable already in my eyes. But at the end of the day, if people are held accountable and they go after these individuals, if you're a nurse or a doctor, they're going to go after your house, they're going to go after your savings, they're going to go after everything you've got, and it wouldn't just be one person. It would be lots of people. You would lose absolutely everything if we get to the point of this accountability falling into the hands of the person who administered that vaccine to you, and especially those that didn't give any form of informed consent at that point of time.
Well, standard protocol for anything, you look at peanuts, one peanut allergy leads to, nationwide, every wrapper, whether it's
Yeah,
nut related or not, ends up with this maybe, around nuts in the factory, etc. And the same thing applies to medicine. If I give a tablet and somebody goes out and carks it in the car parking lot, then you kind of pause the rollout of this new drug, if it was a
yeah,
new drug, and investigate immediately. Now, one of my eureka moments was a surgery down here that we'd had two deaths of two 40-year-olds in the same week. And we'd had a guy, I took a call on the same week when I was on call. And the guy had a brain clot the day after his AstraZeneca. So two deaths from Zeneca and a brain clot, a 41-year-old, the day after Zeneca. Now, that
yeah,
was the first time the neurosurgeon called me an anti-vaxxer. First time I'd ever really come across the phrase. I said, you don't think it could be the vaccine because we just had two deaths in two women from vaccine-induced
yeah,
thrombocytic thrombocytopenia, death by 1,000 clots. Horrible death. And anyway, I took this to my boss and said, look, two deaths. I'm hearing about other AstraZeneca reactions anyway in general practice, but now we've just had this guy, 41, collapsed in Truro, and he's got a cerebral venous thrombosis. And his
yeah,
hands went up in the air. He said, well, what do you want me to do about it? Now, bearing in mind he's a senior doctor. Anyway, that very weekend, to cut a long story short, they carried on the push and they would have administered probably about 500 AstraZenecas to local Penzance folk.
yeah,
When I've just told them that two deaths and a cerebral venous near fatal blood clot being evacuated as we spoke.
yeah.
And yet that didn't cause any sort of concern. Now, any other drug, it would be stopped and pulled. They wouldn't be touching anyone with Zeneca that weekend.
I know. Do you know
They
what I
did
think really
anyway.
amazed me though? Like people queuing up to go in for the vaccines. I'm still queuing up now. There's people here spending 2 hours going in for boosters. But I'm well aware and I've seen videos and I've heard direct stories of it happening, of people going in for a vaccine, dropping dead inside the vaccine clinic, getting taken out. Ambulance turns up, the body's covered up, it's taken out to the ambulance through the people in the queue, and the people still stand there, and the people in the clinic still continue to inject the next person that walks in front of them. It's it's unbelievable. It really is. You just look at
So,
it and go, if this was, it's like at a movie Idiocracy. It's that level of of just blanking everything out and thinking everything's okay and I'll be okay and it won't happen to me. that
It's surreal, isn't it? It's cultist behavior. It's
yeah,
delusional. It's frankly just insane. And like, there's hardly the words to describe it, is there? Because I can't think of anything, any part of the policy around COVID that was either logical or evidence based.
yeah,
None of it. You know, everything from 2 meters to bubbles to city rules to, remember they were doing furlough schemes, and the Tories were getting their mates who were working in other industries to suddenly produce vial glass bottles. And I
yeah,
mean, unbelievable. Eat out to help out. Remember that?
yeah.
The power of sitting in front of a steak, because if you stand up, the COVID will attack you. Um, predator style. As if you sit down with the steak and chips, you're good, you're
Yeah,
fine. Some of these silly rules. And if anyone can tell me a rule that was sane, logical, based in fact or evidence, then I'd like to hear it, because
yeah.
I can't think of one in the whole era.
No, that's it. Now, is it possible for you to work independently as a doctor without the blessings of the likes of the General Medical Council? Is there any areas you can work in that they have no hold or authority over, where you are able to take all the skills that you've got and implement them into the benefit of people's health moving forward?
So yeah, the day the strike off happened, obviously I'd already pre-planned really for the worst case scenario, as you do, kind of just
Yeah,
as a realist. And knowing what big pharma's influence is. But yeah, I mean, I've asked the GMC several times. I've not been struck off before. Can you give me some guidance? There's nothing written or printed on the internet that you can find. They wouldn't answer the question when I said, what can I and what can't I do categorically so I don't get into more trouble? They've not responded to that email. I've sent it 3 times. So I'm going into this kind of new era not really knowing, because they won't answer the question. And if that's the same for every struck off doctor, we've got all this knowledge, all that experience, and it'd be nice to use it. So the way around it I found is to say I'm a health coach.
yeah,
I coach you in your health needs. Little plug on the new website that's been redesigned, ready to go today, probably when this goes out. drdavidcartland.com
yeah,
tells you obviously the service that I run. You have to be very careful, so that I kind of invoke a educational agreement. So we're having a conversation. It's informal. I'm going to give you my opinion on things. Yes, I'm a doctor. I tell people I'm struck off. That's probably why they booked in with me. They admit,
yeah,
badge of honor and all that. And I use my knowledge, and it's kind of a blend. If I was to describe it to anyone, it's a blend of what I learned at medical school, what I'm unlearning from medical school, things like statins and all
yeah,
that scenario, and then blending it with, I've got a pile of books off screen here that you can't see that are naturopathic. So looking at what are the natural alternatives, what are the nutritional ways of healing yourself, fasting and different ketogenic diets, etc., and ways to heal yourself. And so you get that. And the other thing I offer is a listening ear. And that's what you don't get with the NHS. You get prolonged delayed services, gaslighting,
yeah,
and you get 7.5 minutes with your doctor, a grumpy doctor, probably because they've seen 30 odd other people that morning and not had a pee break. So with me, we get as long as it takes. I take a full history all the time, everything from head to toe, just to get the story. And that's what we used to do as junior doctors. You take a full history from your head to your toe. Obviously, I can't examine you. Because it's on the computer, and I don't think one of the things I can't do is that I can't touch anyone, examine. So I have to basically tell people I'm not a registered practicing doctor. And if you want to proceed with the conversation, you've got the human right to do so. And they
yeah,
sign a little document to say we're going to have an educational chat. And it ends up with me recommending, if I think they need to see their doctor for whatever, empower them for that consultation, tell them what to look out for, what
yeah,
to expect from the consultation, signpost them, if not to their GP, but to somebody else. I call it clinical navigation. So how to work your way through the system if you've got X, Y, and Z problem. Like I say, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's a picking of my brains, is how I put it. Just pick my brains,
yeah.
and
No,
it's about as cheap as private practice as you're going to get. I've set it
and,
so that it's
and not only that, you won't die while you're waiting to see your doctor.
yeah, yeah.
Because
I mean,
that's
people. I mean, the reason people come to me is A, they don't trust their doctors now, and B, they've seen my stand, and,
yeah.
and that's the reason they've chosen me out of all the other doctors. They've seen the barrage that I've been under.
No, this is good news. And, again, if somebody goes to a doctor where they'd normally try and give them some kind of pharmaceutical thing for something that they didn't have, which seems to be a common denominator these days, just telling people, well, you need to make sure you got plenty of vitamin D. What are your magnesium levels at? Do you need to be drinking more water with, salts or whatever. All these natural remedies, all these things that have been curing and healing people and keeping people healthy for centuries before we had councils overseeing doctors and pharmaceutical industries for, literally funding their whole, you know, health centers. So they're just there pushing the pills and the drugs.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, I often said, in the medical school curriculum, there's no lectures on it. What you've just said there is common sense, and I would recommend everyone takes magnesium, vitamin D. Keep to the right dose because some people take a bit too much. But these natural supplements keep your immune system ticking over. You
yeah.
don't talk about that in med school. I did a previous degree that taught me my kind of immunological background, really. But in med school, you get an hour maybe or two lectures on it, and that's not enough to understand the fully functioning immune system. You certainly don't get any conversations about vaccines other than don't say anything negative about them or you're out. This kind of like almost golden calf, almost like a false idol. It's
Yeah.
cultism
Yeah.
when I've looked back. And then nutrition. I don't think I ever had a nutritional lecture ever. It's
No.
kind of seen as a separate speciality under dietitian and
And the
nutrition.
thing is, that's the foundation of everybody's health. It's like building a house on bad foundations. If you're just going to be taking, pharmaceutical, petrochemical derived products that will treat the symptoms, but never address the cause. And at the end of the day, it makes me wonder. I've seen people on ridiculous amounts of medicines, literally a table full of medicine that they were taking, and they were fully invested into this is what was keeping them alive. And it's crazy when you turn around and say, well, how are your levels of, as we said, magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin D? Are you drinking the right, not only the right amount of water, but the right quality of water? The most basic, simple principles that keep people alive. And as we said earlier, that have been, even down to the plants, herbs, naturopathic medicines, things like that. I think this is the future. I think the awakening of so many people around the world from what's gone on are turning the back on conventional medicines now and moving back. And they call it alternative medicine. And this is what always makes me laugh. It's the original medicine. This is where, the pharmaceutical companies would see the properties of a certain bark on a tree or a certain properties of a leaf that grows, and they would see what it did and then synthesize this to something that is no longer natural to treat the symptoms. Whereas if somebody actually took the natural ingredients, they would get well. And this is where we're at. But I think this is the future. And I think as much as you've gone through, and as tough as it's been for you, I think if you apply yourself into these areas now, the people will come. As they said, build it and they will come. And if
Yeah.
you're going to be moving forward with natural health remedies using the background and the knowledge that you've got, this is something that people really need to pay attention to, because people now in this era where they can't get to see a doctor and they can't get into the hospitals have to start taking responsibility for their own health, what they eat, what they drink, what they do, but also what they take as supplements and as medicines to keep themselves healthy and being well informed on how that is. I think you're going to do very well with this, to be honest.
It's quite a unique blend, isn't it? Like you say, you're either one or the other usually. Naturopaths tend to have not been sort of
Yeah,
formally medically trained, and the other way around. The medics don't tend to be naturopathically trained. So
yeah,
it's that blend of having a foot in both camps, really. And we've got to get out of this kind of pharmaceutical pill for every ill, because once you start popping the pills, you start getting side effects, and there's a pill for that as well.
yeah,
And so you start racking up, and it makes me sad. Sometimes I walk past the pharmacies in town, seeing the lot. There's never any less than 6, 7, 8 people in the queue, and they're coming out with these like suitcases full of 1 or 2 bags full of drugs, and you're just like, has anyone actually rationalised it? And one of the things I tend to do is just look at drugs and get patients to ask their doctors, what's the
yeah.
indication that you've got, you know, statins in a 98-year-old. It's like, are you serious? Actually, it's just what, and they've been on it for 50 years and no one's questioned it, or they've been on antidepressants and the last time they were depressed was 50 years ago and no one's thought to de-pill them. And that's one of the things doctors don't do, because it's all target driven. The patient isn't a patient, as you mentioned quite rightly. It's about symptom management now, not root cause analysis.
Yeah,
And
no,
you
that's it.
can't get somebody better unless you find the root cause and fix it. You can put a plaster over it, which is a pill,
Yeah,
and cure the headache with a paracetamol. But why did they have the headache to start with? Also,
exactly.
just keep on having them.
Yeah, that's it. And as we're saying, people are waking up. There is, as far as I can see, a mass awakening of people triggered by many things at the moment that are going on. They are questioning what's going on, and in my eyes, this can only be a good thing. Do you believe people will get to a tipping point of critical mass where the truth can no longer be contained, and we have our mass awakening for humanity, and then we set the benchmarks of how we are to live? Or is the likes of the looming agendas of 2030 create a barrier for many? Because the truth now is going to set people free. And I do believe that it's happening. I am seeing an awakening. Now, it might be somebody all of a sudden that has never questioned anything, that might be against digital ID. They might be against anything that Storm has done. They might be against people getting arrested for comments made online. And this is a very well publicized thing. But people are waking up. And once they've woken up to one thing, there's no going back. The rabbit hole is there. They're going to dive into something else. How do you see this happening? Do you think that we are going to have a mass awakening and it's going to be unstoppable?
I think the first thing I'd say is there's a few of them and there's many of us. I think this is why their tactic of division is so powerful,
Yeah,
because they try and divide us publicly and they almost like troll us and goad us.
yeah,
Whether it's sexuality, whether it's gender, black, white, brown, whatever, it's all based on division into sections of society. So we're all busy fighting each
yeah,
other. But yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it myself. I mean, like I say, any doctor I get one on one, I know they know. There's obviously the barriers to getting in trouble or
yeah,
losing their pensions or their job for speaking out. But I think it's the normal punter that really this relies on. The critical mass is going to be them. And that involves the awake from the beginning or the near beginning. You've got this ever increasing group in the middle that are realizing that they're going to the funerals every other week. And I mean, I take my daughter to ballet and we do a game now called Paramedic Watch. And my 6-year-old, and yesterday we nearly broke the record. The record's 11 on a half an hour drive, 11 with three of them blues and twos 3.5 weeks ago. Now, yesterday we got 8. And then the 2 weekends before, it's been 6 and 7. So, there's a lot of ambulances out on the road.
I'm
People can
seeing the
see
same.
that. If
I'm
they can
seeing
be
the same.
bothered to see it,
Yeah,
they'll see. And the hearses on the road as well, and the funeral plots filling up, and watching their elderly relatives getting perpetually iller and iller. So,
yeah,
we need all these people to, and I think there is a bit of fatigue. Everyone's on both sides now. They're just like, the doctors want it to go away for their
yeah,
own benefits. But on our side, I think everyone's just like, it's been 5 years. We've been writing letters and doing podcasts and having protests. And where are we? Is this Agenda 2030 unstoppable? Is it a machine that cannot be stopped? I think it can. I hope it can. I pray
I
it
think we
can.
can. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, these
definitely.
are a small bunch of elites that obviously they've got their bunkers and that they're going to be protected from. I think they want civil war really as a part of the plan.
Yeah,
They want it to kick off, because
yeah,
once it kicks off, they've got a solution for that. Behave yourself, get yourself a
yeah,
digital ID, get the face recognition, and then we'll get you linked, all your money linked to if you have a misdemeanor, then we'll nobble you for train travel, then we'll nobble you for ability to fly and your food allowance, and
yeah.
they'll try and tie a little bit of that into climate change as well.
Ah,
So
fucking hell.
there is this kind of like manifesto of the World Economic Forum psychopaths, but
Yeah,
we we're at the end of the day that we are many, they are few. So they
yeah,
might have this like wet dream of of control over the useless eaters, but
yeah.
there's a lot of useless eaters.
But the level
And
of control, I mean, that has got to, we spoke about people waking up, and I think there is a mass awakening that's going to be unstoppable. But we've got the likes of Elon Musk, Peter Thiel of Palantir, Google, and now Sam Altman of ChatGPT. And they've been developing these neural brain connecting devices, and they say it's for healthcare reasons. But the fact that we have so many developing this concerns me, that it might be something more, because at the end of the day, if they have the ability to control how people think, this to me is the next step of a dumbing down that probably couldn't be done with putting fluoride in whatever, and many other ways that they've tried through food and poisons and toxins. We're a very resilient animal when we look at ourselves. What are your thoughts on this? While you still have your own thoughts, of course.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't need these chips to start with. Just watch the BBC. That'll dumb you down for
Oh,
starters.
well, they're getting hammered at the moment for,
Well, yeah,
you know,
of course,
yeah.
isn't it? I think Mrs. Spring or whatever her name is has disappeared off the face of the earth. The misinformation specialist from the BBC. But anyway, that said, so you've got the BBC and all the mainstream media dumbing people down. You've got all the toxicity in the world from EMF down to, bovar in the cows for,
Yeah,
methane emissions. You've got mRNA injections in the meat. We've got water that's not fit for human consumption.
yeah.
Unless you do something with it before you drink it. And so we're like you say, we're quite resilient in that respect. Um, I've had a brain fart. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, no, we were talking about
Oh,
these
the kids are knocking the door as well.
yeah, the links and stuff. Do we need to pause for a second? Are we good?
Oh no, it's fine. They're going. The mom's done.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, these links and stuff, it's almost like a deliberate dumbing down that they need. It's almost like the running out of ways because we are so resilient, because we do continue to thrive. It almost seems like these brain chips are going to be where people will go onto Google, and I know that Google is been removing information for such a long time. We've done interviews with Google whistleblowers and stuff over the years, talking about this. But the moment they're able to put these chips into people's brains and allow them to, the moment, like if we say, okay, I wonder what the weather's going to be like today, and you think about it, all of a sudden your Google chip is a search engine that's going to say, oh, today the weather's going to be this, 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 and this. So you don't have to go and look for yourself anymore, which creates the opportunity for the information to just be put into your brain, so people no longer have to think for themselves. And I think people have given away the power to a certain extent over a long period of time where they don't think for themselves anymore. They allowed the media to think for themselves. And, I've had conversations with people who've, we've talked about things, such things like methylene blue, for an instance, where there's a lot of negative and a lot of positive light shed upon it. But at the end of the day, people will try and choose a camp that they want to be in. Now, my concern is when we get to a level where people can't think for themselves because they're pushing these chips, it gets to a stage where we are under the total control of, the thought police to a certain extent. And the moment you think something, because you imagine your thoughts, they put these chips in, and all of a sudden you think, do you know what? I don't think that this is safe and effective anymore. Um, you would be red flagged to a system, and next minute a truck would turn up outside your house. You get dragged off, and away you'd go, and you'd be go to some kind of re-education camp. I'd hate to think that we would get to these levels, but I have to look at the tiptoe steps being taken towards these things, and we really do have to question what it is they're going to do with it. And we already probably understand the reasons behind why they want to do it, because they don't want people like me and you speaking out against those who have a very luxurious lifestyle to maintain.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they've stopped us thinking. This whole generation, really, that's coming through from sort of young kids at school all the way through. It's all about AI now, isn't it? We've mentioned Chat GPT, Grok.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, if I was set an essay at school back in the day, many years ago, you'd have to go and get your book out and read it. But now you just bang it into Google AI and they'll give you a model answer. And then, some people will actually just lift it and give it to their teacher. Obviously, there's ways of picking up that through the education system. But these guys will just write a variation on that so it can't be tracked as an AI
Yeah.
answer. So even at levels of basic education, people aren't even doing their own academic work now. It's being
Yeah.
AI produced.
Yeah.
Doctors now, the amount of people that come to me through the health coaching service with AI, they put all their symptoms through AI and it's give them what the diagnosis is, what investigations needed, completely no requirement for a doctor at all. Just somebody to sort of dot the I's, cross the T's and say, do you agree with this robot or whatever it is behind AI? So that's the step on from that is obviously implantable, wearable AI. And
Yeah.
it's heading that way when you've got all the rich billionaires and philanthropists. It seems to be their end goal, like I say,
Yeah.
to control the thought. How dystopian would it be to, if I think about chinning somebody, and somebody's picked up that I'm thinking about chinning somebody, and they've got me for thinking about assault, and that's a new crime. You
Yeah.
know, you
Well,
can
yeah.
imagine it happen, and you only have to watch Black Mirror to give that a plug, and you've got it all.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
they'd like to tell you what they're up to and what they're doing, and watch Black Mirror through, binge watch it,
Yeah.
and it'll tell you exactly what their Agenda 30 is. It's
And that's
happening.
it. If you think as well, if these doctors are going to be the scapegoats, which they probably are, they don't care about the patients. They certainly don't care about the doctors. The doctors are just the facilitators of a money making, power grabbing system that they have. But at the end of the day, I can see the doctors and the nurses taking the fall for this, being held accountable, and them turning around and saying, "We don't need doctors anymore. If you want an appointment, you're going to speak to an AI doctor. All the information's there. It's as good as a doctor. It can give you your diagnosis. And, at the end of it, we'll write you a prescription out. You print it off, and away you go to the pharmacy, or Amazon will deliver it for you. It's going to
Yeah,
get,
they want they
get to
want
that
wearable
level.
medical devices where you remotely capture people's observations and blood. It's like smartwatches that give all that remotely. And
Yeah.
we did that, started during COVID, sorry.
Yeah.
That people were being sent out the paraphernalia to be able to give their doctor over the phone the observations. But
Yeah.
that's what they want. They want, and they were in the last era of my practice as a doctor in the NHS. Like I say, it's a blessing that they struck me off. I'll never go back to working in
Yeah,
that
no, I think
system.
it is.
But there was a culture of what I call noctors. They're not doctors, and basically the whole building was filled with these characters with stethoscopes around the neck that looked like doctors and sounded a bit like doctors, but haven't got a foggiest about any anatomy and physiology. And I've done about a 2-year diploma in following doctors around. That's not a medical education, learning to parrot from a senior doctor. You have to get your
No.
hands in
Yeah.
and see one, do one. And I've had noctors, as I call them, PAs, AMPs, EMP, ECP, paramedic practitioners. The list goes on, and so their numbers are growing. They're paying them a shed load of money, and then you've got the GP who's done all the proper training, all the right experience, seeing 40 patients a day at 10-minute intervals, while these characters have got half an hour to see a fungal nail infection. So the doctors are angry at these. So they even cause division in the coffee rooms because
Yeah.
the doctors hate these noctors and the noctors hate the doctors. And it's dumbing down the whole profession. I had one ask me how to do an abdo examination, and another one that couldn't recognize earwax. These were qualified on 50 grand salaries, the salary of a 3-year SHO. And they just passed through. They'd done banking degrees or art degrees and history degrees and fancied playing doctor a bit of cosplay. And they're being sped through the system. And next time you see, well, I know you won't, but next time you go and see a doctor, make sure they're an actual doctor. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, those poor doctors are on their knees. I say poor doctor, I'm being too sympathetic, but they're absolutely bashing them with these long days and 10-minute appointments to the point of breaking point, and they just leave the profession and replaced with these other doctors. So
Yeah.
the whole thing is set up perfectly for AI to step in, and
Yeah.
they're already talking about it, contactless. We do it now. If you want to access a GP, you don't even speak to anyone now. It's all not quite AI, but it's electronic access through clinic, e-console. You got to write your symptoms down a day or two later. It'll be triaged by a human. That'll be triaged by an AI easily.
Yeah.
And then the doctor will see you now in a week or 2 weeks or today if they've deemed it an emergency. And that might not even be a doctor. It might be a computer screen at one point. And it all gets very dystopian. And the doctor who stood by this COVID narrative for the sake of their pension has been replaced quicker than grease lightning. I've tried to tell them this,
Yeah.
but there's a conspiracy theory. You're
Yeah.
just too far gone, Dr. Cartland. You're too far gone.
That's crazy.
No, your job's going to be gone, mate.
Yeah. Now, I've asked a lot of questions here today, and we could have asked many, many more as always. But as we finish up here today, I want to give you the floor to speak and give you time to say anything you want to the people out there.
Oh God, they put me on the spot there. I'm gonna choose the doctors and the nurses. We've just mentioned them there, and I say this a lot, but I'll say it on this platform. So I want you to, next time you get your work uniform on, you get your equipment ready for the day ahead. You kiss your kids on the head goodbye as you leave for work. I want you to remember, like in my book, I go through my medical school interview. Why did I become a doctor? I want you to ask yourself that question. Why did you become a doctor? What's motivated you to get up this morning and put your nurse's tunic on and scrubs on or whatever you wear for work to
Yeah.
go out and, quote, help the public or help your patients? And then the second thing I'd ask you to do is think about candor, the duty of candor, and patient safety, and evidence-based practice, and medical ethics. And just while you're driving in, just think about, I don't know how many doctors watch this podcast, but have a think about why you're not following these guidances. These are basic tenets of the profession. And then finally, look in the mirror when you get into work, pour your coffee, and then look in the mirror and see, ask yourself what you're seeing reflected back, and what you're going to tell your grandkids. What are you going to tell your grandkids and your great grandkids about what you did during the biggest crime against humanity? And I firmly believe this to be the case. What are you going to tell them? Stand up. Stand up. It's 2025 now. They can't sack all the doctors. They might replace you with AI, but in the moment, they can't sack you all. So just, look in the mirror and ask yourself, who are you looking at, and what they did for your grandkids and great grandkids. I think that's quite poignant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Many thanks for coming on again, Dave. This has, as always, been a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure we'll chat a little bit more just after this, off the record. But, people really need to share this video. People really need to get it out there to have an understanding on not only how dangerous the system has become, but how good people that want to look after your best interests in regards to health are being stopped doing that. And I think that if people understand that and start looking more to being responsible for their own health and looking at the natural approaches and getting in touch with people like yourself moving forward, this is the way that we're going to get through this. I think that the time, don't get me wrong, for an emergency, yeah, you're going to need stuff for an emergency. But in a time where information is there, we can all take responsibility and start looking after ourselves and not allowing doctors that took an oath to do no harm to actually cause harm. And that is where we are in the world today. Thanks again, Dave, for coming on. As we always say here on the Atlantic Underground podcast, believe nothing and question everything. And we look forward to talking to you soon again. Take care, mate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, mate.